Welcome to a place where love isn't just told, it's lived, where broken hearts find their voice, and silence turns into stories of passion, healing, and destiny. Here, every word is drawn from the weight of loneliness that once felt unbearable, from the sparks of unexpected connection that remind us we are still alive, from kisses that shatter walls built out of pain, and from nights where comfort grows into a love so deep it feels eternal. These are not just stories, they are awakenings, moments where the body and soul rediscover their hunger for closeness, intimacy, and trust. If you've ever felt invisible, forgotten, or starved for something real, you belong here. This is more than a channel, it's a sanctuary for true love, raw connection, and the kind of passion that heals what was once broken. The nights after the divorce stretched on like an endless tunnel with no light at the end. There was a silence that filled every corner, a silence so heavy it pressed against the chest until it felt like breathing itself became a burden. That silence was not peaceful, it was sharp, it cut deeper than arguments ever had. At least arguments meant there was someone on the other side of the room. Now there was nothing, just empty air and the echo of footsteps that belonged to no one. It is strange how quickly touch becomes a memory. At first, the body almost expects it to return, as if a hand will naturally reach across the bed in the middle of the night, or as if warmth will find its way back under the covers. But weeks turn into months, and eventually, the skin begins to ache in its own quiet way, as if every nerve is calling out for something that never comes. That ache is not just physical, it's emotional, it's spiritual. It feels like the body is no longer part of this world, but drifting somewhere far away, cut off from the fire that once gave it life. Loneliness does not shout, it whispers. It whispers when waking up in the middle of the night, reaching for a body that is no longer there. It whispers when cooking dinner for one, realizing the plate across the table stays empty night after night. It whispers when walking through a crowd, seeing couples holding hands, and feeling an emptiness that has no name but lives deep in the bones. Loneliness doesn't need an audience. It thrives in the quiet, feeding on silence and time. There were moments when the mind would wander back to the warmth of closeness, the intimacy of two bodies tangled in the dark, the soft sound of breath against skin. Those memories would come uninvited, like ghosts. They weren't cruel, but they weren't kind either. They reminded that life had once held fire, a fire that could warm even the coldest night. They reminded that desire had once flowed freely, that passion had once been as natural as breathing. And then they reminded that all of it had vanished, leaving behind only echoes. The hardest part wasn't the loss of love itself, it was the loss of touch, the loss of feeling someone's arms around a trembling body, the loss of knowing another heart was beating close enough to hear. There is something primal about being held, about skin meeting skin, about bodies finding comfort in each other. Without it, the body grows restless, uneasy, almost foreign. It begins to crave not just affection, but proof that life is still alive within it. There were nights when the emptiness became unbearable, when the bed felt more like a coffin than a place of rest. The weight of blankets did nothing against the weight of loneliness. The silence roared louder than storms, louder than cries, louder than anything the world could offer. And yet there was no escape, not in books, not in music, not even in prayer. The soul longed for something that no words could give, closeness. It wasn't about needing someone to talk to or someone to pass the time with. It was deeper, rawer. It was about needing the intimacy of touch, the press of a hand on the back, the curve of lips against lips, the spark that ignites when two bodies collide in hunger and tenderness at once. It was about needing reassurance that life still held warmth, that passion had not been buried with the past, that the body was still alive, still worthy of love, still capable of desire. Time passed, but the ache did not fade. If anything, it grew. It hid beneath daily routines, beneath polite smiles, beneath the mask of strength worn in front of the world, but behind closed doors, when the night returned with its merciless silence, the truth always came back. The truth that the heart was broken, yes, but worse. The truth that the body felt abandoned, that no one reached for it anymore, no one held it through the storms, no one reminded it of what it meant to be alive in every sense of the word. Every touch that was missing left behind a hunger, not a hunger for anyone, but for the one who could bring fire back into the ashes, for the one who could take loneliness and turn it into belonging, for the one whose kiss could heal years of silence in a single moment. That longing burned quietly, hidden under layers of strength, but it was always there waiting. And so the nights continued, each one stretching longer than the last, each one heavier with silence, each one whispering the same truth. The heart had been broken by divorce, but the body carried a deeper wound, the wound of being untouched, unseen, unloved. That was the weight of loneliness, and it was unbearable, the necessary closing line for impact. It was in that emptiness that the longing for closeness became the only thing keeping life from disappearing altogether. It wasn't planned, and it wasn't supposed to happen. Life after loss has a way of turning into routines, patterns that feel safe but empty. Days became about survival, about doing what needed to be done without thinking too deeply about what was missing. Smiles were practiced, conversations polite, but nothing reached inside where the hollow space lived. And then, unexpectedly, there was a glance. It should have been nothing, eyes meeting for a second, no more. But it lingered. It held just long enough to awaken something buried, so deep it was almost forgotten. That glance didn't speak in words, but it carried a warmth that cracked through the ice that had built over time. For a moment there was no silence, no ache, no weight of years spent alone. There was only a current, subtle but undeniable, moving between two souls as if they had been waiting for that exact instant to cross paths. It wasn't love yet, it wasn't passion yet, but it was possibility, and that was more powerful than anything felt in years. The laughter came later. It slipped out unexpectedly, breaking through walls that had seemed unshakable. It wasn't the kind of laughter that comes from jokes or clever words. It was softer, more natural, like the body remembered what it felt like to be light again. For so long, laughter had felt distant, something belonging to other people's lives. And yet, in that moment, it felt effortless, as if the heaviness of the past could be set down, even if only for a breath. That sound, the sound of laughter after years of silence, was the first proof that life was not finished, that something new could still begin. There was a hand too, just a brush, nothing bold, nothing certain. A hand that passed close enough to stir nerves that had been asleep for too long. It wasn't a full touch, not even a deliberate one. But it was enough to remind the body of what it once knew, the rush of blood, the heat beneath the skin, the craving for closeness. That single near touch carried more weight than years of empty nights, more truth than all the words that had been spoken since the end of the marriage. It was a signal, quiet but impossible to ignore. Desire doesn't come crashing down all at once. It creeps back slowly, carefully, as if testing whether it is still welcome. At first, it was a small warmth in the chest, a flutter in the stomach, a sudden awareness of being seen. Then it became a pull, drawing the mind into places it had promised never to go again. It painted images late at night, brought back sensations thought to be lost forever. It whispered reminders that the body wasn't dead, that the soul wasn't beyond repair. Every moment that followed seemed touched by something invisible. Words spoken in passing carried double meanings. Silence felt charged, no longer empty but full of anticipation. Eyes found each other more often, lingering longer each time. The space between became its own language, filled with things neither dared to say but both could feel. That unspoken energy grew stronger with every encounter, until it was impossible to dismiss. It wasn't about rushing into anything. It wasn't even about planning a future. It was about remembering how it felt to be alive in the presence of someone who could reach past all the broken pieces and awaken something long buried. It was about the way a single spark could light a fire where ashes had been cold for years. It was about the way desire could return, not as recklessness, but as a quiet force that had been waiting patiently for the right moment to be set free. There was guilt in the beginning, guilt for feeling again, for allowing the heart to open when it had sworn to stay closed. Guilt for letting a glance and a brush of a hand mean so much, but guilt could not stand against the hunger to feel alive again. It could not silence the truth that connection had been missing for too long, and that now, finally, it was back. The first spark of connection was fragile, but it was real. It carried more weight than words, more promise than plans. It was the kind of spark that demanded to be noticed, even if ignored for a while. It lived in the pauses, in the quickening of breath, in the way two people suddenly became aware of every movement, every shift, every detail. It was small, but it was undeniable, and once desire returns, it cannot be pushed away forever. It grows in silence, in secret, until the weight of it becomes impossible to hide. That was what began here, in this fragile space. Not a plan, not a decision, not something expected, just a spark. Just the beginning of something that had waited years in the shadows, patient but persistent, ready to bring the heart back to life again. The necessary closing line for impact, in that unplanned glance, that brush of laughter, that fleeting touch, the ashes stirred, and for the first time in years, the fire within began to breathe again. The first kiss came like a storm that had been building quietly on the horizon for far too long. It wasn't gentle, it wasn't measured, it wasn't something that could have been rehearsed or planned. It broke through in an instant, fierce and trembling, as if all the years of silence, restraint, and loneliness collapsed into that single moment. The taste of it was raw, almost desperate, carrying not only desire but also pain, the kind of pain that only comes from years of being untouched, unseen, and unwanted. Yet beneath that pain was a promise that something was awakening, that life itself had returned to a heart that had nearly forgotten what it meant to feel. The closeness had been building for weeks, maybe longer, in the lingering glances, in the laughter that carried a little too much warmth, in the brush of a hand that left the skin tingling long after the touch had gone. Each encounter had stacked on top of the last, quiet sparks that kept igniting and fading, leaving behind embers that refused to die. It was inevitable that they would catch fire, and when the kiss finally came, it was as if those embers exploded into flames, consuming everything in their path. The hunger in that kiss was not just about desire, it was about release. It was about years of walls built high and thick, crumbling in the face of a truth that could no longer be denied. Every barrier created to keep love away shattered under the pressure of lips, pressed too hard, too urgently, as if time itself was trying to make up for all that had been lost. There was no hesitation, no testing, no question of whether this was right or wrong. It was pure surrender, a surrender that came from the deepest part of the soul. In that instant, everything that had been carried, the loneliness, the rejection, the long nights spent in silence, dissolved. All the weight of being unwanted, all the memories of a touch that had disappeared years ago, all the fears of never being chosen again gone. The kiss breathed something new into the body, something so powerful it felt like oxygen after years of suffocating. It was more than physical, it was resurrection. The trembling wasn't just from nerves, it was from the shock of being alive again. The body remembered what it meant to want, to ache, to burn with need that had been buried beneath layers of grief and denial. The soul remembered what it meant to be desired, to be cherished even in the intensity of hunger. The kiss carried not just lust but recognition that this was what had been missing all along, that this was the missing piece that had left life feeling incomplete. It didn't stop with one kiss. Lips moved again and again, desperate, frantic, almost searching. Hands followed, not timid but firm, gripping as if afraid that letting go would mean losing it forever. The closeness became overwhelming, the heat unbearable, but neither wanted to step back. It was as if both had been waiting, aching, for this exact moment to finally arrive. Every second fed the fire, every breath deepened the connection, every shiver confirmed that this was no accident. It was meant to be. What made it unforgettable wasn't just the passion, but the healing woven through it. Each kiss seemed to erase years of damage, rewriting memories that had been etched in pain. Every press of lips whispered, "You are wanted, you are alive, you are not alone anymore." That reassurance filled the cracks in a broken heart, filled them with light and warmth, until the pieces no longer felt sharp but whole again. The kiss lingered even after lips parted, living in the air between them, thick and heavy with unspoken truth. It left the body weak, but it also left it charged, buzzing with energy that had been dormant for too long. Eyes met in the aftermath, wide and searching, both aware that everything had changed. There was no going back to what life had been before. Something had been awakened, something too powerful to deny. The fear that usually comes with such intensity was absent. Instead, there was relief. Relief that the waiting was over. Relief that connection was real. Relief that passion was not something of the past, but something alive in the present. It felt almost impossible to believe, but the proof was there. In the taste of lips, in the racing of hearts, in the undeniable pull that had shattered every wall that had been carefully built. That kiss wasn't gentle because it couldn't be. Gentle was for people who hadn't been starving. This was for souls who had been deprived for too long, for bodies that had been denied too much, for hearts that had been abandoned in the cold and finally found warmth again. It had to be hungry. It had to be trembling, because it carried years of longing that could not be expressed in any other way. The memory of that kiss lived on long after, replaying over and over like a song that couldn't be silenced. It wasn't just about the physical act of lips meeting. It was about what it symbolized. It was proof that love, passion, intimacy, all the things thought to be lost forever, were still possible. It was proof that life could return, that brokenness wasn't the end, that healing could come in the most unexpected of ways. The necessary closing line for impact. In that single kiss, all the years of silence, loneliness, and doubt were replaced with one undeniable truth. Life had finally returned, and the soul was ready to believe again. What began as comfort was never expected to become what it did. At first, it was simply the warmth of companionship, the reassurance of not being alone in a world that had felt so cold for so long. Words exchanged in quiet moments, gentle laughter that filled the silence, the simple presence of someone who stayed. It was enough to make the heart soften, to ease the heaviness that had once felt impossible to carry. But comfort has a way of growing. It lingers, it deepens, and slowly it shifts into something more. The first nights were hesitant, as if the body itself was unsure whether it could truly allow itself to feel again. Every touch was both a spark and a question, testing boundaries, searching for trust. There was fear, of course, fear of being hurt again, fear of being left behind, fear of surrendering to something that might not last. Yet with every hand that lingered a little longer, every embrace that held a little tighter, those fears began to dissolve. The body, once so guarded, began to open. Soon, hesitation gave way to a different kind of closeness. What had started as comfort transformed into something fierce and tender at once. Nights no longer felt empty or endless. They became alive, filled with passion that carried both fire and gentleness. Lips that met in hunger would soften into kisses that spoke of care. Hands that explored with urgency would slow, learning every curve and every tremble as if discovering something sacred. Passion did not stand apart from tenderness. They lived together, inseparable, as if they had always belonged in the same breath. Each touch carried more than desire, it carried healing. Scars that had been carved deep by loneliness and rejection were smoothed over by warmth, by patience, by the undeniable truth of being wanted again. Every time fingers traced skin, it wasn't just contact, it was proof that the body was alive, that it was beautiful, that it deserved to be adored. The past had taken so much, but in those moments, every kiss, every embrace gave something back. Slowly, piece by piece, what was broken began to feel whole again. Trust returned in small steps. At first, it was simply the trust to be held without flinching, to allow arms to encircle and protect. Then it grew into the trust to let go of control, to surrender without fear, to close eyes and know that nothing cruel would follow. The body remembered what it meant to be safe, not in solitude, but in intimacy. That safety gave way to craving, not the kind born of desperation or fear of being alone, but the kind born of destiny, a craving to connect, to merge, to love not because it was needed, but because it was chosen. The rediscovery of intimacy went beyond the physical. It was in the way words spilled in the dark, secrets shared against bare skin, truths spoken with vulnerability instead of shame. It was in the way laughter mingled with passion, how desire did not erase tenderness but deepened it. It was in the way eyes locked during the quietest moments, saying without words, "You are mine, and I am yours." This was not about replacing what had been lost. It was about awakening something entirely new. Nights once spent in emptiness now overflowed with connection, with fire that burned but never destroyed. There was no need to hide, no need to silence desire, no need to pretend strength when fragility surfaced. In that intimacy, every weakness became strength, every scar became beautiful, every wound became a place where love could pour in. The body, once abandoned, learned to crave again, but it was not the craving of loneliness, not the desperate hunger for anyone to fill the void. It was a craving shaped by destiny, a deep pull toward the one who had awakened it. Every night became both surrender and triumph, both passion and peace. It was not just sex, it was the rebirth of love itself, consuming yet gentle, overwhelming yet grounding. And with each rediscovery came the realization that love, true love, is not just about desire or comfort or even healing. It is about becoming alive again. It is about letting another soul reach inside and bring light to places that had grown dark. It is about finding not just passion, but belonging, not just touch, but trust, not just intimacy, but destiny. The necessary closing line for impact. In those nights where passion and tenderness became one, love was not only rediscovered, it was reborn, fierce and eternal, as if it had been waiting all along. Thank you for sharing this journey of love, healing, and rediscovery. If these stories touched you, if they reminded you that passion and intimacy can be reborn even after years of silence, then stay with us. Like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell, because here every story carries the spark of truth, desire, and destiny. Until next time, hold on to love. It always finds its way back